And we are live for today's pre-show of our 220-11-01 Core 1 A+ study group. Hi, everybody. Welcome to a somewhat delayed this month, although it was all scheduled, but normally we have these earlier in the month. But the chaos that is my schedule has pushed us until later in the month. But that's okay. I got all new questions for you. Everything is ready to go, apparently, allegedly. Apparently, this looks pretty good. Hey, everybody. Hey, chat room. I'm just getting a few things ready. We'll be starting at the top of the hour, which means we start in just under 10 minutes and get things going. Got folks in the chat room checking in. Thanks for being here. Let's move some things over just a little bit. Gregorio in the chat room says, got his certification. Congratulations on that. That's always good news. That's a good way to start off the study group right there. Congratulations on that. It's fantastic. I always like getting those stories. I like getting those that, yes, we had a success. We had some certifications. I always like that. Oh, somebody working on CISA. Brittany's working on CISA. That is a good follow-up to Security Plus. There's some good content in there. I kind of like the way that they're laying out the Security Plus, the CISA, and the CASP. They seem to be getting their arms around that one pretty good. So that's great. Is it really possible to get the information you need to be ready for a certification test from our courses? Well, yes, that's what they're there for. So feel free. There's plenty you can do there. So we can absolutely. Where should you start? Start with the first video, the introductory video on how to earn, how to pass your A+ exam. I think that's the first place to go. What do I think about the 701 that's coming out? Well, these things happen every 3 years. So this is another one. So I created a Security Plus 401 course, 501 course, 601 course, and now a 701 course. So it's just more of the updates. It happens every 3 years or so. So it's not a big deal. So it's always fun though to see what's changed in the new versions. And that won't be, of course, that version isn't active yet. There is quite literally no 701 quite yet, but next month we certainly hope it. It is not out. It is not available. It is not on the market. Next month will be, I think is the planned on the 7th, November the 7th. It'll be available to take as an exam. Will people take it on the 7th? Probably not, because there are no study materials for the 701 until the course is released. And then that takes time to study. And it's a very different exam than the 601. So there's a lot of work that still has to be done. But we're getting there. We're making it happen. We've got a lot to go through today. I have all new questions. They're all questions for the 1101 exam. We've got also in the second hour, I open up the chat room and we can talk about life, the universe, and everything from there. There's lots to go through. All right. If I look at my previews, everything looks good on cameras. I've already done the podcast audio. Seem to have a frog that is right in the wrong place of my throat. So we got to get that taken care of. Maybe we'll work it out as we go through this. I did not take a lozenge of any kind, so we'll figure it out. We got about 6.5 minutes before we get started. I'll do one last check. Streaming looks good. This is the streaming server here. It is giving me stats on bandwidth, data rates that I'm using. So I'm pushing out to YouTube almost 6 megabits per second. And then we've got this cache that's here. 3% is where it normally would be. If that goes up, I'm in trouble. That means something isn't working. But it's not, so we're in great shape. And then the rest are just some stats on the side to kind of have me keep track of what's going on there. And all this looks really, really good. Okay. We've got other folks in the chat room. The Bionic Legend says passed 1101 last Tuesday, prepping for 1102. Congratulations. Hopefully we'll be able to get the 1102 in. We will be getting the 1102 in. That's 2 days from now. We're doing our 1102 study group. So you might want to come back for that one as well. So you do. Hey, Malk, welcome. Good to see you down in St. Vincent. The session IDs I'll give you all the Vevox stuff in just a moment. You'll be able to get it. You should be able to see it now if you go to professormesser.com/QA. there is, I guess I could show it, and we could turn this off so that it doesn't make noises. But why would we do that? We have to remember how that works. There it is. Don't make noises. Got folks checking in from all over. Thanks for being here, everybody. I saw Connecticut earlier. There's St. Vincent. There is South Africa, Tucson, Arizona. We got folks checking in from all over the world. So thank you for being here. We've got a few other things to look at. I guess I could bring up, I was going to bring up the image of this thing. There we go. That's where people are joining from. You kind of get an idea of where people might be checking in. There's a lot going on on this side. And again, as I told you, as I mentioned earlier, it was quite a challenge to get this scheduled in this month for some reason. Folks checking in from Tampa, California, Arkansas, Ghana, London, I'm assuming the one in the UK, which is very close to Liverpool in the UK. West Virginia's here. Wichita, Kansas. Was just looking at a few things that I need to work on for travel. It's always nice to see where everybody's coming from. Like, I need to go there. I need to go there. I need to go there. We'll have to work those things out. Here's Oklahoma and Colorado and Kashmir and Seattle and West Africa. The next Security Plus study group, you can always find it at professormesser.com/calendar. It's Thursday of next week is the next Security Plus study group. So we do 2 study groups this week, and we do 2 study groups next week. So it's a busy month. I'm getting them in there. I want to be sure I don't miss any. So we'll make sure we make that happen. There was a question earlier about if I was going to be looking into or considering the CISA Plus or CASP. And I don't think that that either of those is on my short list at the moment. But my short list is always changing. So you never know where that may be coming from. You're never quite sure what will be coming up next. I sort of have an idea because I know, we're finishing up Security Plus now. There's something right behind that I need to finish. And then who knows what happens after that? It's always a mystery. We'll figure it out. Get all of those. Should I start Network Plus or Security Plus? You should take whatever certification would match your personal goals and objectives, and ideally those that would match the requirements from prospective employers. So there you go. That's a very broad answer, but it's probably the most accurate I can give you from a planning perspective. Everyone's different. Some people should do Network Plus to start with. Some people should do Security Plus to start with. Some people should do A Plus to start with, and everyone's different. So we never know exactly where that's going. He plans on covering Server Plus, not on the short list either. Server Plus, wow. You're probably the first one to ask that one in quite some time, which is probably why it's not on the short list, quite honestly. That's one of the challenges is finding traction. It's because Server Plus has good stuff in it, but it's just the number of people taking the exam. Looking forward to 701 on the 26th. What's on the 26th? 26th of what? 701's not out yet. The SY0701 Security Plus exam is not available. It's not available until next month. So, and even then, we're probably not going to do a 701 Security Plus study group because people won't be studying for it yet, at least percentage-wise, a very small group of people. We're not doing Socrative, so you won't be able to find the Socrative room. To do that, you'll want to join Vevox. That was the information right here. Join Vevox.app. The ID is 141-683-742. That will be good. Hopefully. That's pretty much where we go. Let's see. What other things we need to get going? We got 30 seconds to go, so I guess I really should get my act together. Let's get this presentation ready. Got a green light? Love the green light. We are recording. Those look good. Banging into my mic. I think we're in pretty good shape, though. I could probably get a few things ready to go here. Get rid of that. And with all of those things together, boy, the clock on my on here is really off. I need to work on that because it's top of the hour. Let's go back. Presentation's ready here. You guys are ready. I think it's time for a study group. Let's see if we can make this happen. Here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the October 2023 Professor Messer 220-1101 Core 1 A+ study group. A very long title, but what we're really doing is I'm asking you questions today that come directly from the A+ exam objectives, and you online will be able to participate along with us if you're here live and answer the questions we have available. The way that would happen is you would simply use your browser, pop open a new browser window, and visit that browser URL right there, professormesser.com/QA. You could also go to the Vevox app in your favorite app store, grab the Vevox app. And if you do all of those things, there will be a question waiting for you on the Vevox app. There it is. And you can see the ID is right there. Our ID for this one, if you are here live, is 141-683-742. Also let you know that after this first hour of Q&A, I will be opening up the phone lines for additional questions. We will take whatever questions you happen to have. And there's a lot of great questions that are already popping up in the chat as we're going through this. Hold those questions, and at the end, I will show you how you can submit those. You can actually submit them right now in Vevox. So you've got a few different options that you can use for this. Hopefully that can give you an idea of some things that you can focus on. It should be a pretty good idea to step through those. Now, if you do follow the Vevox app and you're there, I have a question that I would like to ask you. And here is the question. It's actually a rewind question, we call it, a question from last month. And that question from last month asks this question. There's always more questions here. Let me pop this open in your Vevox so that you're able to answer it. This question asks, a storage array is showing a failure of 2 hard drives. The users report all systems and data are accessible. Which of the following best describes this configuration? Is it RAID 1+0, RAID 5, ECC, RAID 1, or RAID 0? I guess it's kind of difficult to see me in that particular view. Do I have a macro for that? There we are. Now my head's out of the way. So this is a question we asked last month, and we always ask a question from last month first thing to see if you can get in and answer questions. I also want to see if you happen to remember what the answer is, which is always a good idea. Now, if you know the answer, please don't answer in the chat room. Follow the link that's on your screen at vevox.app and use that ID number. You might also want to follow the link that I have available at professormesser.com/QA. It's another good place to go to answer those questions. Now, we'll come back to this question in just a moment, but I've got a couple that we can focus on. We will come back to this question and see how that goes. Well, we've got a lot to talk about. There have been a lot of things happening here. New technologies are driving us forward to create new training materials. Things are always updated in the world of CompTIA. So there will be a number of different things happening over the coming months. And if you want to keep track of that, you'll want to subscribe to our YouTube channel at professormesser.com/YouTube. You may want to look at Twitter or Instagram to follow us for our daily pop quiz questions from A+. But you've got lots of ways that you can communicate with us, not only on our social media, but directly on our website as well. We'll talk more about that as we go through the training course. All of our questions today are going to be about the 220-1101 Core 1 exam. And sometime in this first hour, I will give you instructions on how you can earn a webinar category CEU by simply watching this webinar. This is something that you might want to use if you are planning to renew your certification using CEUs. If you're not certified, this has no meaning to you whatsoever. If you're not planning to use CEUs to renew your certification, this really doesn't matter either. But some of you do collect CEUs, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to do that. So that's something that we'll talk about later on sometime in this first hour. Make sure you keep your ears open. The current versions of the A+ exam are the 220-1101 and the 220-1102. You have to pass both of those to earn your A+ certification. Those exams were released on April the 20th of 2022, and we expect that they'll probably retire somewhere around October of 2025. So if you are currently studying for your A+ certification, you've got exactly the right version. That's the only version available right now. Make sure all of your study materials are specifically noting the 220.1101 and the 220.1102. You don't want to use older study materials for this newer exam. You will not do well if that's the case. So make sure that you're using the right versions of your study materials. Both of these exams are 90 minutes long. On the 220.1101, you need to score 675 on a scale from 100 to 900. There's also, on the 220.1102, a 700. You need to score a little bit better on that second exam. And the scale is the same, however, between 100 and 900. Now, it doesn't matter when you take these two exams. You just need to pass both of them before the exam series is retired. And if you do that, your exam is now over. Now you are certified, and that certification is good for 3 years. That's generally the process for all of the CompTIA exams, the A+, the Networks Plus, the Security Plus, and many others as well. We're going to focus on the Core 1 today. 2 days from now, we will do another live stream where we will focus on the Core 2. So today we're focusing on Core 1, which means the questions we'll talk about today deal with mobile devices, networking, hardware, virtualization and cloud computing, and hardware and network troubleshooting. So lots to go through there, and you will see those show up in the questions that we talk about today. We will have a video replay of this available immediately afterwards on YouTube. Also, in the next day, I always create a podcast audio-only version. You can subscribe to that with your favorite podcast listening program. You can probably find it in your favorite podcast index, or you can simply visit professormesser.com/podcast, and there's a link there that you can add the RSS to your favorite podcast listening program. It's kind of nice to have that. Those are available for A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus as well. If you look on our YouTube channel about a day later after this is over, you will find that there are timestamps that are suddenly available in the YouTube video description where you have chapter markers throughout the entire video. Those don't happen automatically. Those happen thanks to the hard work that is done by my marketing manager, Lori. She's watching this in the replay. Hey, Lori, how you doing? She's going through this probably at 2x speed and trying to figure out the best way to approach this particular challenge of listening and putting the times in. So we've been doing this for years. It's a great resource. Make sure that you have a look at those as well. This will probably help you quite a bit once you get into studying. You're looking for that specific thing that was during the study group, and it's hard to find, but you can find it very easily by simply going through this and having a look at our timestamps that are there. It might help you find it just a little bit faster. When we are not here having a live stream, we absolutely are on our Discord channel. You can find us there. It's a great way to chat with ourselves and with people who are also studying for their exams. We'd love for you to join us. Simply follow the link that's on your screen, professormesser.com/Discord. That will get you to our Discord server and everyone that is there studying their A+, their Network Plus, Security Plus, and who knows what we're going to talk about on the live stream. So it's always something interesting to go through. If someone is ever working through the details, that might help you as well. At some point, you're going to need to take your exam. And of course, we have vouchers available for you on our website. These are discounted vouchers where you can get the exact voucher that you would get in other places, but you don't have to pay full price. So you can certainly go to the CompTIA website and pay full price if you'd like. But I have the same voucher on my site available, already discounted. You don't need a discount code. You don't need an extension in your browser. It simply makes it available on my website. You'll see the information that's there. It's available for U.S. and Canada and a number of U.S. territories. Not only do I discount the vouchers, if you purchase the voucher on my site, I also give you a free copy of my Exam Hacks ebook, which might help you study a little bit better for your exam and might even give you a few extra points during the exam itself. Let's go back to that question I asked earlier, and let's talk about what we saw here. The question again asks, a storage array is showing a failure of 2 hard drives. The users report all systems and data are accessible. Which of the following best describes this configuration? Is that RAID 1 plus 0, RAID 5, ECC, RAID 1, or RAID 0? So let's have a look at what you answered. We're going to close the poll and show the results. And you can see that 53% say the answer is RAID 1 plus 0, 25% say the answer is RAID 5. And then we have down to 11% for RAID 0, 8% for RAID 1, and almost 2% for ECC. Now, if you're someone who's been working with RAID, you know that redundant array of independent or inexpensive disks, depending on where you come from in the world of RAID. You know that RAID 1, 0, or 1 plus 0, or RAID 10, depending on how people might say it, is one that we call a stripe of mirrors. That's because we have what effectively is RAID 0, and as many of us know, RAID 0 is zero redundancy. But if you add to this a mirror of these RAID drives, then suddenly you've now got redundancy for the stripe, which is a really fantastic thing if you lose multiple drives, as long as those multiple drives are from different sets of pairs. So in this particular picture, you have 6 drives. You could technically lose 3 drives. You could lose one on that pair, one on this pair, and one on another pair, and you'd still be up and running. It's one of the beauties of RAID 1 plus 0 is having that there. So that's what I tell people all the time. If you're in a situation where you're trying to determine what would be the best way to connect in and use these RAID drives, it's a great way to do it. Now, when I start working through, pardon me while I actually plug in my power here. When I start working through RAID issues, if you're ever in this situation where you're working into RAID problems, you know that knowing where to go with the RAID configuration is important consideration. So I always tell people, make sure you are aware of this RAID configuration. It's going to help you on the exam, and you do need to know these. They come directly from the CompTIA exam objectives. I'll mention these objectives here very quick, as a matter of fact. If you don't have these objectives, there they are. These can be extremely important, especially if you're someone who's trying to get more information about what's actually on the exam. It tells you everything you need to know. These are available for free from the CompTIA website, so make sure you have a look at these. They're at, and you also have a link from my website. Go to professormesser.com/objectives. Had to remember myself. That objectives link is a great place to go to be able to have that there. So hopefully that's something that can help you if you're ever working through these. Well, we have more things to look at. I've got another question coming up that I'd like to ask you. We're going to step through these one by one. Before we do our performance-based question, I want to step through a question that is a multiple choice question. So I know we generally start with a performance-based question, but the one I have for you is, well, we might be able to do. I was looking at my my laptop here. I may be able to do the performance-based question first. So let's maybe shift gears over to this. Wait, that's too many of me. There we go. Let's shift gears over to this. I've got one that I can show you that is in my system. We'll do this one after this. One of the ways that I like to focus on looking at these exams, I'm going to quickly go back to the exam objectives. A lot of people like to go through a bullet by bullet to know exactly what they should work through. And in that last scenario, we were talking about RAID and redundancy. All of these topics are part of the exam objectives. So if you go through and look at things with storage drives, you'll notice there's information there about drive configurations. And there it is, a redundant array of independent or inexpensive disks, RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, or RAID 10. And that's where we want to get all the information from that will give you the details you need to be able to know exactly what you should expect on this exam. I got an email this past week that actually said, what about the other RAID types? What about RAID 2 and RAID 3 and RAID 4? Because there are other RAID types out there, and there's many, many different RAID types. But I tell people all the time, focus on the objectives. you will only be asked about things that are on these objectives. So a good example of that is RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, or RAID 10. Stick to those, and I think you'll be fine. Let's now get this performance-based question of the month. One of the things I always mention to people is that the first handful of questions you get on your exam are not going to be multiple choice-based questions. They will be questions that are anything but multiple choice. So you might get a question that is a matching question. It might be a fill in the blank. It might be a question asking about doing a drag and drop. There's different ways to ask these questions that come from your exam objectives. So what I want to ask you is a question like that as well. I think there would be a lot of value in knowing what you should do to be able to work with this. So let's go through the details of what that might be. I need to bring that up on my screen. If you would apologize, I apologize right now as I'm stepping through this. I'm going to open that presentation, if I can find it on my screen. That's the beauty of a live stream, by the way, is me clicking around until I get to the right thing. Let's have a look at this month's performance-based question. This is one that is a matching question, and the question asks, here we go, match the tool to the description. Some descriptions will not be used. And the reason I say that is because you can see there are four tools on your screen, but notice that there are 6 different descriptions. That means that some will be left over at the end. So what I want you to do is match these to the descriptions. And for those of you listening in on the podcast side, let's have a look at what those are. So the different options I have are loopback plug, tone generator, port mirror, or cable tester. So you've got 4 different tools that I've listed here. But I have 6 different descriptions. I have listen for signals on a wire without a direct connection. What tool would you use for that? Attach an RJ45 connector to a patch cable. Inject a beeping noise onto a copper cable. Copy all traffic from a switch interface. Test the operation of a router interface. And check the wire map of an Ethernet drop. Now, 4 of these obviously will match to the tools that I have here. So if you are plugging this in to your Vevox app using the information that's on your screen right now, you might, if you think they're already in order, you would simply submit 1A, 2B, 3C, 4D, and you're done. Now, it isn't that answer, thankfully. We have others that are listed in here, but you're going to have 2 descriptions left over. So for extra credit, see if you happen to know what those extra 2 might be. What tools would you slide in for the 2 that you did not choose? So maybe you can think of the different tools that you would need to know for the A+ exam, and maybe you can fit those into this list as well. For those of you listening in again, let me give you those tools. They are a loopback plug, a tone generator, a port mirror, and a cable tester. And the 6 different descriptions are listen for signals on a wire without a direct connection, attach an RJ45 connector to a patch cable, inject a beeping noise onto a copper cable, copy all traffic from a switch interface, test the operation of a router interface, or check the wire map of an Ethernet drop. You've got those 6 different options there to be able to choose from. And I see a number of you are starting to submit your answers into the list. And you can simply follow this by going to professormesser.com/QA and locking in your answer, or follow the vevox.app link that's on your screen with the ID of 141683742. And of course, once you're there and plugging in your answers, then you only have to stay in that one place because it's the same link every time for every question that we're going to do today, which I think might help you a bit. Now, this is a matching question. Performance-based questions tend to ask the information from the exam objectives in a way that is not multiple choice. And that really is the key, is you want to find ways to answer these questions that are not simply choosing A, B, C, or D. And that's what CompTIA is trying to get across. But if you know the information in the exam objectives, as I always say, it really doesn't matter how they ask the question. You'll know the answer. You've already studied these answers. you probably know what this one happens to be as well. So let's step through these one by one and see how you do with this particular question. Again, this was match the tool to the description. Some descriptions here will not be used, and we have a loopback plug, a tone generator, a port mirror, and a cable tester. So let's start with the very first one, which is a loopback plug. For a loopback plug, we would choose option E, test the operation of a router interface. A loopback plug, of course, is what you would use to test the physical interface of a device. That might be a router, a switch, a firewall, a CSU, DSU, could be anything. Could be any network equipment whatsoever. And a loopback plug is designed to take any data going out of that plug and loop it back into the receive pins on the same plug. That way you can send information out the interface, receive that information immediately, and then you can compare. Did I receive everything I sent? And is the information I received matching the information that I sent? And as long as everything matches, then you can pretty much assume that the physical interface is working properly. But if something is corrupted, if you lose data, if something does not look like what you sent, then there may be a problem with that physical interface on that device, and that loopback plug allows you to test that. Let's do the next one, tone generator. The tone generator, this one might be a bit of a gimme. That's something you plug into a network cable so that you can find the other end of it somewhere. And the way that you find the other end is you listen for a beeping noise, and that beeping noise is added by the tone generator that you're putting on one end of that cable. So that is an important tool commonly used in conjunction with an inductive probe. So a toner probe, sometimes we refer to it as a shortcut, which consists of both the tone generator and the inductive probe. This means you're able to go through the process of listening in for that signal without having to touch the physical copper. You just have to get close. Maybe I've already given away one of those. So I'm fine doing that. Third on our list is port mirror. A port mirror is a very useful tool for network administration and network management because we can capture all traffic going in and out of a particular switch port and redirect that traffic to a network analysis tool like a packet capture device. So if you're copying all traffic from a single switch interface, you can tell that switch, take a copy of all of that traffic and send it to this other interface on the switch so that we can capture and see what's going on behind the scenes. This is one of the reasons we often tell you you should encrypt all of the data you're sending across the network, because you never know who's tapping into the network and watching the packets go by. You can gather a lot of detail from these packets, but if you encrypt everything, they could provide this port mirror all day. They won't have any idea what type of traffic is going by. Next on our list, or last on our list, is cable tester. The cable tester is great to use if you want to check a wire map. That means you want to see on pin 1 of one end of the cable, where does that connect on the other end of the cable? If it's a straight through cable, pin 1 should connect to pin 1, pin 2 should connect to pin 2, pin 3 should connect to pin 3, and so on. Now, if you have a different type of cable, if it's a crossover cable, it'll be a different wire map. If it's a rollover cable, it'll be a different wire map. And a cable tester is a great tool to use to create that wire map. You put one part of the cable tester on one end of the wire, you put the other end of the cable tester on the other end, and it's able to determine what that wire map might be. So useful to have this. Well, that means there are 2 of these that we did not choose. We did not choose answer A, listen for signals on a wire without a direct connection. And we also did not find an answer for B, attach an RJ45 connector to a patch cable. So if you're thinking about the tools that you would use to make this happen, then you should be able to fill them in for extra credit. So let's start with the first one, which is listen for signals on a wire without a direct connection. I've already given you the answer to that one. If you were listening, I said that if you partner the tone generator with an inductive probe, you're able to listen in for those signals, and that's how you can find the end of a cable, even when it's in this large group of cables inside of a data center, an IDF, an MDF, a wiring closet. Those are great tools to have. If you are someone who's in that environment, I even have a tone generator and inductive probe in my house because our homes now are so wired with cables. It can be very useful to find where that one might go. And I think in my home, I have patch panels. I have everything coming into one room. Well, of course I do. So I think a lot of people do these days. I think a lot of people have a lot of structured cabling in their home. Low voltage, as they say in the construction business. They have a lot of low voltage cable, and having a toner and a probe can help you quite a bit. And the last one is attach an RJ45 connector to a patch cable. One way to do that is to use a cable crimper. That's what you would use. Another good tool to have if you're not familiar with creating your own cables, building out your own lengths of cable, putting on your own connectors. It is a bit of a learning curve to finally get it working properly. But once you've destroyed a few connectors, once you've miswired and miscrimped a few connections, you start to get the hang of it. And you realize after maybe 5 or 6 of these, and you start to get it, that it's a lot easier than you thought it was. It's just a series of techniques, sort of muscle memory until you get it right. And having a good cable crimper allows you now to create any type of cable, any length of cable you would like, and be able to put that through the wall and then put the crimper and connector on at the end of it. It's a very useful tool to have and a great skill if you're going to get into networking. So those are our answers. A loopback plug tests the operation of a router interface. A tone generator injects a beeping noise onto a copper cable. A port mirror copies all traffic from a switch interface. And a cable tester checks the wire map of an Ethernet drop. And as we've already discussed, listening for signals on a wire without a direct connection is the job of an inductive probe. And attaching an RJ45 connector to a patch cable is a cable crimper. Well, those would be the right answers for that. So hopefully you did well with your matching question. That was our performance-based question of the month. Let's now shift gears into doing a different question. This will be a multiple choice-based question, and it asks, which of the following can be used with a DVI-D interface without a signal conversion? And if you think you know the answer, I've got a few different options to choose from for the answers that are there. Would that be eSATA, HDMI, VGA, DVI-I, or Lightning? Which of the following can be used with a DVI-D interface without a signal conversion? Is it eSATA, HDMI, VGA, DVI-I, or Lightning? If you think you know the answer, follow the links at your Vevox.app. You could, of course, also follow the link at professormesser.com/QA to answer this particular question. Let's see if you happen to know what these are. A number of you have already putting in what you think those are. That happened really quick. Whenever I see the numbers pop up like that, I think, well, we either all know the answer or maybe we don't know the answer this time. Maybe that's our challenge. We'll know in a moment what it happens to be. It's got to be one of those two, right? We'll figure it out. This is also an important one. This does come directly from the exam objectives. So make sure you're familiar with these different adapters and connectors, especially between different data types. It's an important one. So now that we've had a number of you that have locked in your answer, let's see how you did with this one. We'll stop the poll and look at the results, and we can see that 43% of you say the answer is DVI-I, 36% say it's HDMI, 15% say it's VGA, and then you've got 3% for eSATA and 1% for Lightning. Well, your question here about DVI-D. DVI is obviously a video interface type, video format type. So just as you would put VGA, HDMI, and DVI, they would all kind of go into the same category. DisplayPort, these are all video types, right? So if you have a DVI-D interface, that means it's digital. A DVI-I would be an analog type connector. But being able to convert or to plug in and convert just the pins from a DVI-D, you need to also have another digital type available. And the type that we were hoping to find is DVI to HDMI. Those are the two that I'm looking for because those two are electrically compatible with each other. The signal on DVI-D is effectively the same type of signal that's on HDMI. That makes it very, very easy to simply use a passive adapter, very similar to the one that you see right here, It doesn't have anything that requires any type of power. You don't have to convert that from one type to the other. You don't lose signal quality because it's digital, it's not analog. So the way that you would convert without needing any type of signal conversion is DVI-D and HDMI. So you've got a few different options to choose from. Here's a better view of these interfaces, DVI and HDMI. And in this particular case, that's where we would focus our efforts. Those are the two that we would want to use without signal conversion. So that's what we would focus on, is the one that does not have signal conversion. So our answer here, HDMI, is what we were hoping to find. You can see that 36% of you did choose HDMI. We have the 43% of you that chose DVI-I, unfortunately, would not be able to use without a signal conversion. There needs to be some type of conversion to get to a DVI-I interface. So that's not one we would choose. Same thing for VGA. We would need some type of conversion to get the VGA. And since DVI is a video interface signal, eSATA would not apply here. That's a storage type. And Lightning would not apply here. We generally don't send DVI signals over a Lightning connection. So that would not be what we would use. And even if we did, it would still require some type of signal conversion. The connection that we were looking for here is between DVI-D and HDMI. Those signals are electrically compatible, and you simply need an adapter to be able to use those. So that gives us at least some insight into the process if you're someone who's working through those types of signals. Let's do another question. I've got one here. This question asks, a company is charged a cost for their public cloud services based on the number of transactions and data that is stored. Which of the following would describe this cloud characteristic? Would it be synchronization, high availability, metered, VDI, or rapid elasticity? A company is charged for their public cloud services based on the number of transactions and the data stored. Which of the following would describe this cloud characteristic? Is that synchronization, high availability, metered, VDI, or rapid elasticity? If you think you know the answer, follow the link on your screen at vevox.app and use the ID that's there, or simply use our link, professormesser.com/QA, to take you to that link. So hopefully this is one you're already familiar with. Cloud computing and the characteristics associated with cloud computing are things you should know. And in fact, all 5 of these answers are things you should know. So make sure you are familiar with them. Even if you don't recognize one of them, make a note of it so that you can go back to your exam objectives, have a look at what's written there, go through your notes, go through your books, go look at the video associated with these. Be a very important thing to know. Especially if you don't recognize any of those terms, that should be a red flag. That should be a notice to you to make a note of it so that you can go back and figure out what is that referring to, because that may come up on your exam. So you always want to plan and be ready. Finding the things you don't know are just as important as understanding what you do know, and that may help you for the exam. Let's see how you did with this one. The question asks, a company is charged for their public cloud services based on the number of transactions and the data stored. Which of the following would describe this cloud characteristic? Is that synchronization, high availability, metered, VDI, or rapid elasticity? Let's stop our polling, and we can see that the results show by far 81% of us believe it is metered would be the answer that we were looking for. 10% say the answer is rapid elasticity. And of course, why wouldn't it be? Because it just sounds so good. But only 10% say that. We've got 4% that say synchronization, 4% that say high availability, and 0%, exactly 0% say VDI. Nobody thinks that it happens to be VDI. Well, 81% say metered, but you might be surprised at knowing, yeah, it's metered. That's exactly the correct answer. Maybe you're not surprised at all, since that 81% is there. The metered cloud services mean that you are going to pay a different amount depending on how much you use. This is, for example, how I am charged for my cloud services. So if you go to professormesser.com, I'm charged based on how much traffic is going to and from my website. I'm also charged for things that I use on Amazon's web services because I have different cloud-based web services that I'm using in different places. So every time I upload a file, every time I download a file, every time I modify a file, all of this costs money, and I am charged that amount at the end of the month. So the more I use, the more money I have to pay. The less I use, the less I have to pay. So there may be some really good advantages to choosing a type of billing system that uses a metered cloud service. Now, the other part of this, and you probably have seen these as well, there are some cloud services that are not metered. They are a flat fee that you pay every month. For example, if you use Google Drive, if you use Dropbox, if you use Box.io, if you use any of those types of cloud-based file sharing services, those have flat fees for many of non-commercial use type accounts. So non-metered means that every month I'm paying $90 a month. I can upload as much as I want. I can download as much as I want. I can change things around as much as I want, and it only costs me $19. That is not metered. They don't care. Maybe I don't upload anything on that month. Maybe the next month I upload 1,000 files, still cost me $19. It's not metered. So hopefully that can give you some perspective to both of these. I think if you're ever in a situation where you are working through and trying to really get an understanding of what this might be, that's the real focus, is trying to find out where you would use those cloud-based characteristics. Now, we have other characteristics here as well. Synchronization describes how you would get data synchronized across different cloud services or across different systems. That's another way to do it. High availability is talking about keeping the systems up and running should you happen to lose a component of those systems. We have VDI, virtual desktop interface. That's commonly the term that we use for desktop as a service. It certainly is very similar to that, especially on the cloud side. VDI doesn't have to be a cloud-based service, of course, but it's one where your desktop is one that is not on your desk anymore. Your desktop is on a centralized server to be able to do that. And then you've got rapid elasticity. Rapid elasticity describes the ability to scale up or scale down automatically in many cases. And in this case, that's not what we were shooting for. We were trying to talk about how we were charged for these systems, and a metered system certainly fits from that scenario too. So hopefully that gives you some perspective as to some of those cloud services and how you would use them. Make sure you're familiar with all of these different cloud service characteristics. You could be asked about any of these on the exam. Well, already in just a very short period of time here, we have talked about many different technologies, configurations, different tools, different cloud-based systems, networking components, and of course, your A+ exam covers a lot of different technologies, including operating systems, security, networking, and so much more. Well, I think you should watch all of my videos to learn everything you need to know, but there are very clearly 137 videos in my A+ series. It's over 19 hours of content. And although I'd love for you to go through every single one of those videos, I'm also a realist, and I recognize that not everybody has that kind of time. But there are ways that you could take all of the information from all of those videos and view everything collapsed into a single document. And these are my course notes. I have course notes available for the 220-1101 and the 220-1102 exam. These are the course notes for the 1101. There's 58 pages or 59 pages just for those course notes. And they'll tell you a lot about everything that's all of the important text, all of the important graphics, all of the important tables. I put them in my course notes. This is an easy way that you can consolidate everything into one single view. And although it doesn't replace the videos, it doesn't replace a good book, it doesn't replace hands-on, it still is a very good summary so that after you've read the book, after you've watched the videos, now you have everything in one place. Have a look at these. They're available on my website. You can learn more by visiting this link, professormesser.com/1101notes, and you can learn all about what I have available for my course notes, practice exams, and so many other study materials as well. That's at professormesser.com/1101notes. Let's do some more questions. We have time for some more, so I think we should go through these. Next one on our list is a question that asks, a technician is reading a diagnostics report regarding IOPS. Which of the following is the technician troubleshooting? Is that technician troubleshooting video resolution, storage drive performance, wireless signal strength, LCD display brightness, or a network throughput? So a few options to choose from. A technician is reading a diagnostics report regarding IOPS. Which of the following is the technician troubleshooting? Are they troubleshooting video resolution, storage drive performance, wireless signal strength, LCD display brightness, or network throughput? If you think you know the answer, follow those links at vevox.app to lock in your answer, or follow the link on your screen, professormesser.com/QA, to lock in your answer. Some of you were asking earlier about partial credit for multiple choice questions, especially questions where you may have to answer more than one answer. And also that seems to come up a lot for the performance-based questions as well. CompTIA does have a frequently asked questions document on their website, and they have said rather clearly that they may or may not provide you with partial credit. So it's almost a non-answer, isn't it? That doesn't help very much, I realize. But at least the option is there. Sometimes they might give you partial credit. Now, the problem, though, even after they tell you that, is you'll never know when they give you partial credit. They don't tell you how the exam's graded. So you could get your final score, but you still don't know whether any of the answers you gave got partial credit or not, because they never tell you. So even if we knew or didn't know that they give partial credit, it means nothing, because ultimately you'll never know if you took advantage of partial credit or not, because they don't tell you. That's one of the things about the exam. I think we're all curious about it. We all want to know, but this is going to be one of those mysteries of life that you will never know, ever. No one knows. It's a mystery. That's one that we'll just have to hope for the best. And that's why I tell people, don't worry about the grading. Don't worry about the underlying system they use to determine what the final score is, because it doesn't matter. We don't know what it is. They're not going to tell us what it is, and you'll never find out what it is. So just do the best you can on the exam. That's my recommendation. And don't worry so much about the grading. The grading will take care of itself. If you know the content, you'll do fine. So stick to that. Let's see how you did with this question. It asks, a technician is reading a diagnostics report regarding IOPS. Which of the following is the technician troubleshooting? Are they troubleshooting video resolution, storage drive performance, wireless signal strength, LCD display brightness, or network throughput? Let's see what you answered. We have 59% that say the answer is storage drive performance, 22%, almost 23%, say network throughput. We've got wireless signal strength at 9.46%. We know how important that 46% is. Video resolution is 4%, and LCD display brightness is also 4%. Well, this was the real question. Knowing what IOPS is going to be the key to this particular question. And if you are in the process of monitoring a storage drive and trying to determine, is the storage drive working properly? Are we able to transfer information into and out of the storage device at an expected rate? One of the ways to do that is to get some type of metric, some type of quantitative analysis of this particular device and how it's working. And you can see in this particular case that I have some that show you a good idea of the type of performance that you might be expecting. Now, of course, there's devices on your network and in your systems, and it's important to be able to measure these if you ever want to do any type of troubleshooting. And so one of the ways that you can measure this and have a number that you can really track and measure across different devices, we can measure the input-output operations per second, or what we call IOPS. Really, it's IOPS. Really is what it is, but we just abbreviate it as IOPS. The input-output operations per second allow us to be able to understand how much we should be reading or writing for a particular device. And it's very common to see this. For example, if you're using a hard drive, it's not uncommon to get a number of operations per second around 200. But if you're using an SSD, you could get somewhere around 1,000,000 operations per second. That's a pretty big difference if you're ever trying to break out and understand why is a SSD so much faster than a hard drive? Is it really that much faster? Is it really worth the investment in an SSD? Yes, it absolutely is. And you can look at the IOPS to really understand why that is the case. 200 versus 1,000,000 is a big difference. So you can see why, if you're someone who's ever been running a traditional spinning hard drive and you've pulled that drive out of a system and you've replaced it with an SSD and you've booted it up, you're suddenly surprised. It's almost like you're getting a new computer when that happens, because our spinning hard drives tend to be a very big slowdown to the entire system. And simply installing an SSD can add enormous amounts of performance. And here you can see an actual representation of the difference between traditional spinning hard drives and something that's a solid state drive. And this is a great measurement as well. So if you're trying to do some diagnostics of a drive and someone's asking you, is this drive really performing properly? Well, let's see what the stated IOPS is. What is the specs for this drive? Now let's run our own tests. Are we getting close to what the specs are? And if we are, then the drive is probably operating just fine. So IOPS is what we were looking for this answer. A lot of you already knew that. 60% of you said IOPS is exactly what would be associated with a storage drive performance. Video resolution doesn't really have performance based on it. I guess there are some, the resolution is part of the overall understanding what the video might be. There are other video testing type of metrics that you can use, but resolution is not one of those. Wireless signal strength has nothing to do with IOPS. IOPS tends to be a storage drive metric. LCD display brightness, again, this has nothing to do with a monitor, so that's not the issue. And network throughput, although that is an important metric and something that can tell you a lot about performance, especially performance that's being sent over a network connection, IOPS is not something you would generally associate with network throughput. Normally, you would use measurements of bits per second or bytes per second to describe the amount of data being transferred over the network. If it's a storage drive, however, you're probably using IOPS to be able to give some type of performance metric of that one. And we did really well on that one. About 60% of you got that one absolutely correct. We've got time for some more, so let's do another question. I have another one available for you here. This next question asks, which of the following security techniques would be most commonly associated with the Bluetooth pairing process? Would we use multi-factor authentication, NFC scanning, GPS location, emailed access code, or PIN verification? The question again asks, which of the following security techniques would be most commonly associated with the Bluetooth pairing process? Is this multi-factor authentication, NFC scanning, GPS location, emailed access code, or PIN verification? Those are your 5 possible answers. People are locking them in quick on this one. So we either know this one really well or we don't know this one really well. I guess that's really the answer in all cases, isn't it? It's one of those. We either know it or we don't. We'll find out in a moment which ones we chose for that one to be able to understand this particular answer. The Bluetooth pairing process is also covered in the exam objectives. Make sure you're familiar with this. It's one of the only security things that it's one of the few security techniques we can apply when connecting to a Bluetooth device. There are other security pieces of Bluetooth once you connect, but this is obviously something that's going to be pretty important too. So let's see how we do with this one. A number of you have already locked in your answer, so let's see how you did. Which of the following security techniques would be most commonly associated with the Bluetooth pairing process? And in this particular example, PIN verification by a long shot. I think a number of us have done this before, haven't we? We've connected to Bluetooth headphones. We've connected to Bluetooth in our vehicles. We've connected to a Bluetooth speaker. And in every single one of those examples, there was probably some discussion of a PIN, personal identification number verification for these. It's the first thing that's important to us. If you see suddenly someone trying to connect to your device and the PIN doesn't match one that you are using on your device, then that certainly would be a security concern from you. So a PIN verification. Now, if you're someone who's worked with Bluetooth pairing, you know it's a relatively simple process. You would enable Bluetooth on both sides. You put it in discoverable mode. You select the device from your list. Do I want to connect to my watch? Do I want to connect to my AirPods? Do I want to connect to my car? And it will connect you to those. And then it will prompt you, or at least give you the option to see if the PIN, the personal identification number on your device, matches the one that's being seen on this other device. That's the important part of it. And that's the real secure part. So that gives you an option to make a decision. Do you allow this device to connect, or do you not allow this device to connect? And it's that PIN that is that first tip of the spear. It's the first thing that is going to help us from a security perspective. And then once it's connected, once you say yes, you can then test it and make sure that everything is working fine. That is exactly where you should focus. The PIN verification. If you've been working with Bluetooth, you're probably familiar with this. We had 13% of you said NFC scanning. NFC, the near field communication, some of you are already familiar with this. It's that connection on the back of your phone that you would connect to a device and you'd be able to transfer data using NFC. Probably the most common use of NFC would be to use things like Apple Pay or Google Pay to be able to pay for things when you're checking out at a store. But that is not associated with the Bluetooth pairing process. So that's not what we would choose. We have 3% that said multi-factor authentication, and Bluetooth only has one type of authentication, which is the PIN. It's the personal identification number. There are not multiple factors of authentication that are used during the pairing process. Only one factor, and that is that personal identification number, which in that particular case would be, I guess, something we have sort of combined with something we might know, but it's certainly something we have. And then we've got GPS location is 2.5%. Bluetooth pairing does not look at GPS. It doesn't care where you happen to be in the world when you're pairing those. And then emailed access code. That is not something we do during the Bluetooth pairing process. It's a very common process. I just logged into a service yesterday, and I logged in with my username and password, and it said, one final check, we're going to email you a code. Give us that code so that we know you have control of your inbox. And although that's not a great authentication factor, it's a pretty good authentication factor. So in that case, I checked my email. There it was. I pasted in the code and I gained access. But Bluetooth doesn't do that. Bluetooth does not email you an access code. In this case, the only answer, the one that makes sense, is the one that 81% of you already chose, which is the personal identification number verification. I got that one absolutely correct. Well done. Let's do another question. I've got some more here. This next one, since we're in the mood for networking, this question asks, a user is transferring a file from their computer to a network share. Which of the following would commonly be used for this communication? It's a port number question. Let's see how we do. Is our answer going to be TCP 445, UDP 161, TCP 22, TCP 3389, or UDP 53? So this is going to be interesting to see what people choose. The question again asks, a user is transferring a file from their computer to a network share. Which of the following would commonly be used for this communication? Is it TCP 445, UDP 161, TCP 22, TCP 3389, or UDP 53? If you think you know the answer, lock it in with the Vevox.app ID on the left side of your screen, or use the link at the bottom to professormesser.com/QA and lock in your answer. See if you know what this might be. Some of you in the chat room not very happy about the port numbers, as I can see already. There's a lot of port numbers you need to know for your exam. What are we up to? About 15 port numbers we need to know. So that is the real key, is knowing what these happen to be. So hopefully you're familiar with these. Port numbers are something that once you start using them, they just become second nature. I realized during the process of learning on the A+, if you've never used port numbers before, it seems like it's very rote and you're wondering why you have to know these. And then once you use them to configure a firewall, to set up a personal firewall on a device, to look at data that you've captured in your your protocol analyzer, port numbers become incredibly important. So make sure you're familiar with these if you're someone who is working towards any type of networking knowledge, and everyone will need some type of networking knowledge in your career. Make sure you become familiar with these. And the ones on the A+ exam are not the only ones that you will memorize throughout your career. There will be many others as well. We see an update to these when you get to Network Plus. You'll see these port numbers again. That's how important they are. Let's see how you did with this one. The question asks, a user is transferring a file from their computer to a network share. Which of the following would commonly be used for this communication? Is it TCP 445, UDP 161, TCP 22, TCP 3389, or UDP 53? So what did you choose for this question? Let's stop our polling, and we can see that about 50% say it's TCP 445. It's a pretty strong number. But we've also got a third of you that say it's TCP 22. We have single digits after that. 6% say TCP 3389, 5% say UDP 161, and 4% say UDP 53. That's effectively a three-way tie for third place. So our two in the lead are TCP 445 and TCP 22. Well, the key to this question and really understanding it is knowing what we are doing during this process. And this question clearly asks, a user is transferring a file from their computer to a network share. A network share is a term that you would commonly hear associated with Microsoft Windows. Windows uses that term of a network share to be able to know where to put files onto a system. So knowing that we're working with Windows and knowing that we're transferring data across the network and we're transferring it from our computer and putting it onto the share, then we would probably want to use the protocol known as Server Message Block, or SMB. And it's not just a big block of cheese. It is used for file sharing. It's used for printer sharing. It's used for a number of different things within the Windows operating system. But this is what Windows likes to use to be able to transfer data over the network. So that can be pretty useful to be able to understand what type of underlying protocols are being used on a Windows operating system. So that's why in the case of Windows, you might be using an older version of Windows, and that older version might give you the option for transferring data using UDP 137 or TCP 139, being able to work through those. So those are very good ways to transfer data on older versions of Windows. But if you're using really any modern version of Windows, then you're probably going to be using TCP 445. It is a direct connection between your device and a server or network share or printer that's somewhere else on the network. So that's the very common protocol that you would work with, is really making an understanding of what would I see if I was going to block traffic on my network and I was going to, or send traffic across my network and I was going to send it in Windows and I was going to send it to another device or to a network share, and you captured that traffic and you were looking through the packets that were going back and forth, and you start to see TCP 445, TCP 445. That would really give you the insight into understanding, oh, that's an SMB. Somebody's transferring a file. Somebody's in Windows right now and trying to get things to work properly. That's what you would use, is TCP 445. And in fact, 50% of you say, yep, that's what I would use too, would be TCP 445. And of course, 49% of you, 50% of you got that one right away. That's one that many of you chose, and that was the right answer. TCP 22 had also a large number of people answer. About a third of you, 33%, answered TCP 22. And although TCP 22 is a very common protocol, usually associated with SSH, secure shell, it doesn't have anything to do with transferring a file from a computer to a network share, since we're talking Windows terms there. TCP 22, most commonly used for SSH, for secure shell, can also be used for file transfers in Linux that are set up to use that SSH to be able to make that happen. But SSH is not something you would commonly see associated with a network share, which is really a Windows term. So that's not what we would choose. It would not be commonly used for that communication. And so I would say that although there are ways to transfer data over TCP port 22, we would not commonly use that to transfer a file from your computer to a Windows network share. So that's why the TCP 22 in this case would not be the correct answer. 6% said TCP 3389. That's the port that's commonly used for again, Microsoft, since we're talking Windows, a remote desktop protocol, or RDP, commonly uses TCP port 3389. So if you're sharing the screen of another Windows device across the network, you're helping somebody out with tech support, your family has called you and says, I need you to fix this. You're in a different state, you're in a different city. You can use remote desktop protocol to be able to configure and work on that device, and it commonly uses TCP port 3389. We also have 5% that say UDP 161. That's commonly used for the Simple Network Management Protocol, or SNMP. In this case, we were not gathering network statistics. We were transferring a file, so we would not commonly use UDP 161 for that one. And then lastly, we've got UDP 53. About 5% of you chose that one, 4.88%. And in the case of UDP port 53, that's commonly used by DNS, the domain name system. That's what we would use to be able to find an IP address if we have a fully qualified domain name, or vice versa. We can do many things with DNS, and UDP 53 is commonly used for those DNS lookups. In this case, the answer that is the most common, the one that fits best for the question that we're asking, is indeed TCP port 445, and about 50% of you got that one absolutely correct. Well, that I think is, gladly we're done with our port number question of the month. No more port numbers. You're in good shape now, chat room. Let's do another question though. I know it's top of the hour, but we're gonna have a little bit of overtime here as we go to the next question that is on our list. This question asks, which of the following would be the expected output from a desktop computer's power supply? We have a number of different options here. Would that be 120V, 15V, 100V, 12V, or 240V? V in this particular case would be volts. So I don't think I'm giving too much away there. Which of the following would be the expected output from a desktop computer's power supply? Is it 120 volts, 15 volts, 100 volts, 12 volts, or 240 volts? See if you know the answer. Lock in your answer by going to the Vevox.app ID on your screen, or visit professormesser.com/QA and lock in your answer. I'm going to take a sip while we're doing that. See if you know what these happen to be. This should be a pretty good one. If you're working at all with power on a computer, you certainly should know this. You never know exactly what you're running into with power. That's one of the reasons I mention in our power videos how important it is to really know what you're doing when you're working inside of a computer, so that you don't cause any type of problems when you're working with power on these systems. So I highly recommend, if this question is something you weren't expecting, or maybe it's asked in a way you didn't quite understand, I would highly recommend you look through that video on computer power just to get an overview of what you would expect in this scenario. Only one of these questions is right, so we need to know what this happens to be. Of course, as always, please no answers in the chat room. Please no hints in the chat room. We instead want to answer by visiting the links that are on your screen at vevox.app, or follow the link at the bottom of your screen, professormesser.com/QA. One of those is going to be right. So let's see which one you chose. We have a number of people that have locked in their answer at this point. So let's see how you did with this one. Again, the question asks, which of the following would be the expected output from a desktop computer's power supply? Is that 120 volts, 15 volts, 100 volts, 12 volts, or 240 volts? Let's see how you answered. We'll close the poll, and we can see, wow, we're almost torn on this one. We have about 46% say it's 120 volts, and then we've got about 42% that say it's 12 volts, and then everything else drops off from there. We've got 7% that say it's 240, 3% say it's 15 volts, and you've got 1.72 that say it's 100 volts. So the real question, the real part of this that I think maybe thrown some folks is that we were looking through all of this and thinking, what would be the output from a power supply? And that's the real important consideration here. We're not talking about the power we're bringing into the power supply. We're talking the voltage that we are getting out of the power supply. So if we look at the output that's on a power supply, we can see that we've got a number of different options there. Very commonly, 12 volts is something we might find if you're needing to power your PCI Express adapters, if you want to get your hard drive running. Sometimes the cooling fans in some systems might use 12 volts, and it's very common to see this used on your most modern computers. 5 volts is also a common output from a power supply. Many of the motherboard components can use 5 volts. We're seeing fewer than them these days. We're seeing quite a shift away from using 5 volts and using things like 3.3 volts that you might use for M.2 slots, for your memory, for other components that are on the motherboard itself. That would be very useful to know what you would see for any of those. And there's also a type of voltage that's a +5 standby voltage. You ever notice that it's always has power, and whenever you push the button to turn it on, something has to be monitoring it when it is suspended. So you'll know exactly what happened with your standby voltage. It also uses 5 volts. So most commonly, you're going to see 3.3 volts, 5 volts, or 12 volts output on a power supply. And if you look really close at the power supply, it will even tell you. For example, on this one, you can see that this power supply will accept an input anywhere between 100 and 240 volts. So this really works anywhere in the world. But the output can be anywhere from 3.3, 5, or 12 volts. And that's what that power supply, most power supplies, that's what you will find, is that mix of different voltages. So if we go back to our question, then we can now look at the question a little bit differently there and get an understanding of this. Which of the following would be the expected output from a desktop computer's power supply? And you can see here, although 45% of us chose 120 volts, and that is the plurality of the answers, we see now that that is an expected input value along with 240 volts. So 120 and 240 would be very common input values on a power supply. We were looking for the output values, and the output values here, the only one that's left that matches any of the output values we were just looking at would not be 100 volts. It would not be 15 volts. It would be indeed 12 volts. That would be the only option here that would match what we would hope to see as an expected output from a desktop computer's power supply. Well, I think that was one that gets us in the mode of understanding a little bit better what we might expect to see on an actual exam, because they use those types of terms on the CompTIA exams to really get you thinking about what you should choose for all of those. So in this case, a lot of you didn't think 12 volt was going to be there, but indeed that is the correct answer. If you chose 12 volts, you got that one absolutely right. Now, I know we're at the top of the hour, and I kind of went into a little bit of overtime, but I do want to very quickly maybe do one more question. This next question then goes or is pulled directly from my practice exams. Now, if you've not seen my practice exams before, I wrote these exam books because I started looking around the internet. I looked at some of the practice exams that were offered other places, and I found that they were either poorly written or in some cases giving you questions that come from previous versions of the exams, which of course don't help you a bit if you're studying for the latest. So there was a real problem with finding accurate questions and finding questions that really applied to the current version of the exam. And I thought, well, if nobody else is going to offer this, I'm going to write some questions that will be guaranteed to apply to this version of the exam. And there will be questions that are constructed in the same type and form that CompTIA likes to ask. And I created these in a book that I call my practice exams book. I have one for 220-1101 and the 220-1102. This is one that has 3 separate practice exams inside this single book. So it's a total of 389 pages, 3 90-question practice exams, and they are both multiple choice-based questions and performance-based questions. So a little bit of both. So it really is an important thing when you're looking through this that you get high-quality questions. So as this last question, I would like to go to my practice exams book, and let's do a question directly from this exam. And again, please no answers in the chat room. This question asks, this is from question A51, asks, a company is developing an internal application for smartphones and tablets. Which of the following would improve the security of the application's login process? Is it data caps, two-factor authentication, Bluetooth pairing, or NFC? Now, one thing that's in my book is that if you just want the answer, A, B, C, or D, you can go to page 31. I'm on page 18 right now. So normally you would scroll in your book. I have this as a physical book too. You can scroll to the page that has the answer and you can see what the answer is, A, B, C, or D. I also have a page that has detailed answers. You can see it's on page 87. Now, since this is a PDF, I don't have to manually scroll or turn to page 87. We can instead simply click in our PDF reader and it takes you to page 87 immediately. So it just jumps there with a link that I built into the book. And here you can see the question is at the top, and it has the answer as B, two-factor authentication. And as you've probably seen on a lot of other practice exams, I tell you why that answer is the correct answer. So pretty good. Now, the problem when I take these exams, though, is I always get questions wrong. And you telling me why the right answer is right is okay, but I want to know why the answer I chose is the wrong answer. Why is that the wrong answer? That's a learning opportunity in my mind. So what I do in my book is every incorrect answer has a list of why that's incorrect. So you'll never be wondering, why is that not the right answer? I thought that was right. You'll have an explanation of why I don't believe that to be the right answer. And I even encourage you that even if you get the answer right, I highly encourage you to read through the wrong answers, because on your exam, the answer may have nothing to do with what the actual right answer was for my question. On your exam, it might be a question about NFC or Bluetooth pairing or data caps. So I think it's important that you understand those technologies as well. I try in my book to have actual exam topics. So I don't try not to make anything up as part of the answers here. You may have seen that on other ones as well. And you've got the option of both a physical version of these course notes or these practice exams or a digital version. You're seeing the digital version on the screen right here. Also, by the way, if you have no idea what the question is asking, at the very bottom, I give you where this question came from. In this case, it was from my 220-1101 course, Objective 1.4, and the name of the video that covers this is Mobile Device Connectivity. And you can either click the link to go directly to that video, or if you have this in the physical form, you can use your phone with your camera and just scan the QR code and bring up the video so you can watch it after you have taken that question or read through the question for just a little bit more context, something that can help you. And then in this particular case, I have a back button in my PDF reader. I can go back and I'm back to where I started, and I can simply go to the next question that's on the list. Those are my practice exams. You can find out more on my website at professormesser.com/core1pe. There, as I mentioned before, everything that is in these course notes, practice exams, and everything we've gone through today is pulled directly from the CompTIA Exam Objectives. This is a free document. It's available for download on the CompTIA website, and it tells you everything you need to know to pass this exam. Make sure you get a copy of it. You can go to your favorite search engine and type in CompTIA Exam Objectives. It'll be your first link, I'm sure. Or you can simply follow the link on my website. Go to professormesser.com/objectives and follow that link to get over to the CompTIA site so that you can download those exam objectives. We do one of these study groups for A+ every month. We actually do 2 A+ every month, one for Core 1 and one for Core 2. And this month, 2 days from now on the 19th, we have our Core 2 study group. Also in October, next week, we have our Network Plus and our Security Plus study group. And then for November, I've already set the dates for the A+ for November 7th and 9th. And then we have November 21st and 28th for our Network Plus and Security Plus study groups. And if you ever want to know when we're going to do a live stream, maybe you're watching this video months later and you'd like to know, well, when is the next live event going to be? You can always go to our calendar right here at the bottom of the screen. Go to professormesser.com/calendar or simply use the calendar link that is on the main menu at the Professor Messer website. Well, we've gone through really a little more than an hour of Q&A today, but don't worry, we're not done. I have plenty of answers coming to you from on my side. I'm going to have you ask me questions over the next hour. You can find out there. Stand by for that one. I'll give you more details. Again, don't forget about the discounted vouchers that are available on our website at professormesser.com/vouchers. We have our course notes, practice exams, and so much more on our website. You can find that at professormesser.com/1101success. And of course, if you like this video, we'd love it if you gave it a like, maybe even subscribe to our YouTube channel. You might also want to join us on Discord when we're done. Go to professormesser.com/Discord. We've, of course, got our Twitter and Instagram daily pop quizzes, and we would love it if you subscribe to our YouTube channel at professormesser.com/YouTube. Well, that brings us to the end of a first hour. Stick around for the after show. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time on the A+ study group. Okay. I will take a sip. We will bring in a picture of me. There I am. We will close out this particular poll. And what I need to do, let's see if I can close out this particular poll. There it is. And let's close this one. So what I'd like to do now is some Q&A. And we have a few questions that have already been posted. As soon as I get my configuration set up here, I'm going to give you directions. I guess I need to close the poll, don't I? Reopen. And there we go. So now if you look online, you will see on this page, we have an option for you. So I wanted to answer questions that you have posted. The best way to do this is to go over to Vevox. You can see on the Vevox.app and ID number 141683742. You can submit questions for this second hour at any time. And I'm going to go through this list of questions to have here. Before we do that, I mentioned earlier on in that first hour that we are going to give you a continuing education unit credit code. And we're going to do that right now so that you can then submit it to me. So you have to follow these instructions to be able to earn your CEU. To be able to do this, you need to go to the top or the bottom of the professormesser.com website. There's a link there for Contact Us. And in that Contact Us link, I want you to put your name, your email address. In the subject line, put we're in October 2023. Be important to put the right month there. And then in the body of the message on a line by itself, I want to put the super secret code word of the month. Maybe we'll use one from that last question that we have. Our super secret code word of the month is 12 volts. 12 volts is our super secret code word of the month. So again, to be able to earn this CEU, go to the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website, click Contact Us. In there, put your name, your email address. In the subject line, please put October of 2023. And then in the body of the message on a line by itself, please put the super secret code word 12 volts. Now, you can also put anything else that you would like into that message. I would be more than happy. I read through every single one of these. So I read and have a look at all of them. I don't necessarily have the ability to send you an answer because I go through hundreds of these in a month, but I do read through every single one of these that you put. So thank you for sending along those messages. Sometimes it's where you are in your studies. Maybe it's discussing an upcoming exam or one that you just finished. Always like to do that. And then there are instructions on the CompTIA website on how you can submit that CEU to be able to renew your certification. So you now have the instructions on submitting questions. I'm going to go through some of these questions. We'll put them up on the screen and we'll have a look at what happens to be there. So let's see different options that are there. We'll start with one that we sort of talked about this before. but I will go through this process of maybe figuring out more about what we would do with it. So let's move this one and have a look at the question that we have here. This is from Tav. And Tav asks, if you only get half of the questions correct on a performance-based question, do you still get half the points? Well, the answer, CompTIA has given us the answer to this on their website. They said maybe. That is the very definitive answer they gave on their website. As I mentioned earlier, there's a frequently asked questions on the CompTIA website, and the frequently asked questions don't mention at all if this is guaranteed. It says they might give it sometimes. It really is a challenge. Let's see if I can find that frequently asked questions real quick, so that you can really understand what those differences are, and understand where you might be graded or how you might be graded for this. So on the CompTIA website is a performance-based questions, frequently asked questions. That's a little slightly difficult to understand, but we know what they're talking about. And the question here, and they got a number of questions here, such as, if I close the window, can I reopen it? What does the reset button do? How do I move to the next question? That type of thing. And this one says, is partial credit given if I answer part of a performance-based question correctly? And they say, maybe. There may be questions for which partial credit is offered. However, exam questions and their scoring are confidential, so no further information can be provided regarding which questions may offer partial credit. Thank you for calling. That's it. So they say we could give you partial credit or we could not, and we'll never tell you. So there you go. That is a non-answer. It's sort of an answer, but it's not an answer. Because this could also say you will get partial credit, but you'll never know if you get partial credit because we won't tell you if you get partial credit. Or it may say we don't give you partial credit. At least then we would know. But they've sort of left it up in the air and said, well, maybe. Maybe we'll give you partial credit. Maybe we won't give you partial credit. It's really up to us. And by the way, you will never know, ever, whether you got partial credit or not. So, like I said before, don't worry about the grading. Don't worry about how they grade. Don't worry about what they grade. Don't worry about the points for the grading. Don't worry about it because you have no control over it. You have no knowledge of it. You'll never be told how it was graded. All you know is your final score. And so focus on the content. Don't focus on the grading. Don't focus on the scoring. Don't focus on any of that. You have no control over it. What you do have control over is what you know. You do have control over how much of the exam objectives you know. So if you can study those exam objectives and you know everything that's listed in the exam objectives, you're going to pass your exam, regardless of how they score it. So that's what I would recommend you do as well. Definitely work on that. That would be an important one too. So let's do some more. We've got other questions that have come up in this list. So let's have a look at what those might be. So let's talk about some of these. This was a question, kind of more of a question of vouchers. This question from Maddie asks, hey, I'm ready to take my test soon, but I'm not sure exactly when. Well, you're not the only one going through that. Do your vouchers expire? Now, this is an important consideration because if you're trying to pay for an exam, you can go to the CompTIA website, pay full price, and just pay right there on the CompTIA site. You don't need a voucher that you would turn in to pay for this exam. But if you are you're trying to schedule your exam, but you don't know when it's going to be, you might want to purchase a voucher, and you can certainly save money that way by purchasing a voucher from, for example, ProfessorMesser.com. You're going to pay less. So you'll save quite a bit of cash just by purchasing the voucher from my site. Now, when that happens, you've now got this voucher, but you've not turned it in yet. You've not scheduled your exam with it yet. The rule is that, generally speaking, when you buy the voucher, it's good for about a year. I say about a year because you'll purchase it and then I will provide it to you. Sometimes it's a year minus a day because I bought them yesterday to give to you. I try to do them all in the same day, however, so that it will be 1 year is the time. So it's either a year or a year minus a day. So it's basically a year. Those are good for 1 year. Not all vouchers are good for a year, but the vast majority of the ones that you're going to come across are good for a year if they're a new voucher. You may at times find a dodgy website out there somewhere that has vouchers that are only good for 6 months, and they might price them differently. So you might run into that. Those are kind of unusual to find, however. Most vouchers are good for a year. Now, that means you have to take the exam before that year expires. So it's not use the voucher for a year. It's not like you can wait 360 days and then use the voucher and book your exam for a year from now. You can't do that. That'd be 2 years. So you can't do that. You have to both use the voucher and take your exam before the voucher expiration date. So the moment you buy that voucher, the clock is starting and you have to take your exam in a year. That's why I tell people, don't buy the voucher until you're ready to take your exam. That's really your best bet. That's the best practice, because then you don't have to worry about expirations or worry about timing out, or because I've had people come back to me and said, oh, I didn't realize it, and now it's been a year and now my voucher is no good. Like, oh, there's nothing I can do because now your voucher is expired, and I can only point you back towards CompTIA to beg for some additional time for your voucher. Sometimes they'll give you that time, sometimes they won't. So don't put yourself in that position. Buy your voucher when you're ready to take the exam. And I think that's probably your best bet. It's not going to be a problem once you do it that way. So that's what I would recommend too, is become very familiar with when your voucher is expiring and make sure you get your exam done before that. Only do that once you get to that particular readiness to take the exam. Some people like to buy their books and their vouchers at the same time. I think that's probably not a good idea. I think you should wait to buy your vouchers until you're ready to take your exam, and I think that's the best bet. Let's do some more questions. Got some more that have come in here. So next on this list, when we look through, so this is one that since we're talking about performance-based questions, this will be a good one to talk about just a moment. And let's discuss these two. This was from Ramon, who asks, how difficult are the performance-based questions, and how long should they take to answer? The performance-based questions are, I think they are relatively easy questions. I think if you know your exam objectives, it doesn't matter how they ask you. So we're so used to multiple choice, A, B, C, D, or sometimes E, I guess. A, B, or C, or D. You choose one of those, there's your answer. And I think we're very used to answering questions in that way. But you've already seen on our study group, we did a matching question, which we could have turned into a multiple choice based question. I could have asked you, in our case, what would be the most common use of a toner? What would be the most common use of a crimper? And I might have 4 answers there. It was sort of the same question I asked you in our performance-based question that was matching, but it was almost like taking 4 questions and kind of pushing them together into one single performance-based question. So I think that should tell people the way to do performance-based questions, they're not difficult, as long as, of course, you know the content, the same way that a multiple choice question isn't difficult if you know the content. It's just a different way to ask the question. And I think if you know the content, you're going to be fine. They can ask you the question however they'd like. You're going to know the answer because you know the content. And very often, and this even happened in our Discord this morning, someone came in and said, I just passed my exam. And you know what? The performance-based questions were pretty easy. And so I think we worry about that unknown. It's the fear of the unknown that we often find ourselves worrying about. But then when we get in the exam, we realize, oh, we already know this. This is easy. It's just drag and drop. Boom, 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 boom. Or it's matching. Yeah, I got it. Or it's putting things in a particular order. I'll just move things up and down. That's the type of thing you should expect to see. Now, sometimes the questions are a little more involved. They have more questions. For example, the one we did today had 4 different tools that you needed to find. Well, that could take some time to really discuss. The second part of Ramon's question is, this probably will take you a bit longer than multiple choice based questions. So you need to take that into account, that I tell people sometimes you may want to consider jumping over the performance-based questions. You can do this with any questions on your exam. You can skip it. Let's skip that one, skip the next one, skip through those first handful of performance-based questions, go straight to the multiple choice because that's pretty much what we're comfortable with. And now we can go through all of our multiple choice-based questions. When we're done with that, we can go all the way back to the beginning or anywhere we want and jump around to the performance-based questions and answer those last. Because then you've had some time to think about the questions. You've got some time to kind of take in the questions that were asked for multiple choice. Sometimes the multiple choice questions help you answer the performance-based questions. So that might be a pretty good strategy for you. By skipping those, you don't have to worry about the time. You can go straight to the multiple choice-based questions that you're already probably familiar with, at least the style and the method. And then you can circle back and use your remaining time to finish up the performance-based questions. Now, I'll take you to the next most common question about those is people will ask, well, what's worth more, a performance-based question or a multiple choice-based question? And the answer is we don't know and we will never know. I mean, we could posit that perhaps CompTIA scores performance-based questions more than multiple choice, but in reality, we don't actually know that's the case. There's no evidence pointing to that. And there have been people that have taken their entire exam, answered every multiple choice-based question, and then they ran out of time. And they say, I never got back to answering any of the performance-based questions, and I still passed. So that's still a possibility. You could still do that. You could take these exams, answer every multiple choice question, and you could possibly still pass without doing any performance-based questions. So now that really makes us think, well, or maybe the performance-based questions are not worth as much as some people might think. The reality, of course, is we'll never know. They will never tell us. We will leave this earth not knowing how much a performance-based question was worth. It's a mystery of the universe that you're just going to have to deal with for the rest of your life. I think you'll do fine, though. I don't think that's going to weigh on you very much. I think if you don't worry about it is probably your best bet. So I would highly recommend you don't worry about it. And it's not going to be a big deal for you. So that's what I would say you do, is go through those and really take them in, understand what they're asking of you, and then don't worry so much about the grading. I think that's where most people worry, is on the grading part. Don't worry about it. You don't have any control over it anyway. Let's do some more questions. This is one that came up early, and I think it's worth talking about. So let's talk about the one that Eric asks, which says, does it make sense to take CCNA before Security Plus? Or will Security Plus give me a better foundation for CCNA? First, it's a pretty interesting question. It's not the one I normally get. Normally, people want me to compare CCNA, and for those not familiar, this is the Cisco Certified Network Administrator, CCNA. It's one of the most popular Cisco certifications. When people talk about getting Cisco certified, this is the one they're usually talking about. But certainly Cisco has a number of different certifications that they offer, but it's probably their most popular. Usually people want to compare that to Network Plus because I think that probably is the most comparable comparison, although they are two very different exams, two very different certifications that are really for two very different purposes. And even more so if you try to compare CCNA to Security Plus. So let's talk about both of these and where they fit in the world of certifications. We'll start with Security Plus because I think most of us here are familiar, at least with CompTIA and the Security Plus series. The Security Plus is the entry-level security cert for people that are getting into IT. Now, this doesn't mean that after getting your Security Plus certification, you're now qualified to work in an IT security department. That's not what that means. That means that you now know the basics of the nomenclature and methods that are commonly used in an IT security department. But I think if someone who's been in IT security like I have, you know that it's not just about security. You know that if you get into that level of IT security, you need a strong foundation in operating systems. You need to understand networking extremely well. You need to probably have already done some planning, designing, or troubleshooting of networks and the applications running over those networks. And you need to have understanding of not just one operating system, but multiple operating systems, ideally at a minimum, Windows, Mac OS, Linux, and at least probably even iOS and Android as well. There's 5 different operating systems that you really need. You need a strong foundation of the basics of IT before you get into security. That's sort of my point. So I think it is a path you have to go through. You have to gain your knowledge over time until you're at a point where you are someone who is qualified to move up into the IT security ranks. Now, this might change depending on where you are in the world. For example, if you live in the Washington, D.C. area of the United States, you live in Maryland or Virginia or any of those areas around, you know that a lot of the federal government agencies and the companies that work with the federal government tend to ask for Security Plus. That's because it is one of the minimum requirements for getting a job that has anything to do with technology for the Department of Defense. And a lot of other organizations tend to take that as the standard. And that's why if you're in that particular part of the United States, there are probably going to be a number of different, if you look at the jobs that are available out there, a large percentage of the jobs are going to ask you for Security Plus at a minimum. Don't really care so much about A+, don't really care so much about Network Plus, but they really care about Security Plus. But this is a very geographic requirement. It's a very federal government mandated sort of requirement. If you start looking at jobs in Dallas, Texas, you will see a different group of requirements. Those jobs might be asking for A+. They might be asking for a Microsoft certification. They might be asking for an Amazon Web Services, AWS certification, or they might be asking for a Cisco certification like CCNA. It just depends on the job, and it depends on the organization and what they're doing. It might also be different if you're in Miami. It might also be different if you're in Minneapolis. It might also be different if you're in LA. So I always tell people what the thing that makes sense should be based on what you're trying to do. So if you're trying to get a job, what jobs are out there that you qualify for? Look at those jobs. What jobs are available? See if they ask for an A+, see if they ask for Network Plus, see if they ask for Security Plus, or whatever they ask for. See what they're looking for. I mentioned this. I have a video on how to get a job in IT with no experience. It's in the YouTube video description of this video. And that video, it's 30 minutes long. So it's really long in the world of YouTube videos, but it is full of information on what I feel are the most important things you should do to prepare yourself for that first job in IT. And if you're someone who is working through IT and trying to figure out, how do I get my foot in the door? I think this is an important thing to consider. You need to be working towards the things that employers want you to have. So if you look at all of the jobs in your area and those job postings, and 75% of those are asking for an A+, you should go get your A+. If 75% of those are asking for a Security Plus, you should go get your Security Plus. If 75% are asking for CCNA, you should go get your CCNA. So my answer is going to change depending on what you're trying to do and where you happen to live. And the same thing in the chat room, same thing applies to Europe, same thing applies to Australia, same thing applies to Japan, same thing applies to anywhere in the world. You need to look at the job postings and see what employers would like you to have, and that's what I would like you to have, if you want to look at it that way, assuming, of course, that your job is to get, your goal is to get a job in IT. And that may not be your objective. You may have different objectives, and you should set your requirements accordingly. Your goals should reflect those objectives that you're working towards. So when you look at the question from Eric that said, do I take CCNA before Security Plus? Do I take Security Plus before CCNA? Which is the better foundation? I don't have the answer to that because I don't know what you're trying to do, and I don't know what employers want you to have. Now, that said, if you're someone who is interested in in getting into IT and working with switch administration, router administration, network design, network troubleshooting, anything relating to networking, CCNA is a very popular certification, and you'll probably find employers asking for that. but you should double check with the job postings that are in your area to see if that's the case. Now, getting Security Plus, that's a different set of requirements with a different set of jobs. And probably the CCNA and Security Plus rarely are on the same job posting. But what you probably will find is that you'll have a job where you start in the world of operating systems, you become a Linux administrator, a Windows administrator, you become familiar with Active Directory, you work with Mac OS, you become familiar with these operating systems, and then you add on to that a knowledge of network. Maybe you move into the network administration space, you become familiar with switches, with routers, you become familiar with other technologies in the networking world. Now you've got a good foundation under yourself of both operating systems and networking, and that may be the point where you want to jump into security. Maybe that's the time Security Plus becomes important. So it's sort of a long answer for something that is an involved question. It seems like a simple question on the screen. That's a pretty involved question. And there's so many variables. Everybody has their own path. Everybody has their own idea of what they'd like to do. And so you need to evaluate that versus what you want to do. Sometimes both of these sort of lead you on a path. When I was working in my career, I did start on sort of the hardware field service technician side. I moved into corporate help desk. I moved from there into operating system administration, specifically desktop. I moved from desktop administration to server administration. I moved from server administration to network administration and planning. And then from there, moved into the world of systems engineering and working directly for the manufacturers. So that was a really good case of, and from there moved into cybersecurity, worked for a next generation firewall company. So that was sort of my path. Now that took me 20 years to work that path, but it allowed me to really gain the knowledge and keep building on the knowledge. And I often tell you, in leveling up, I was able to level up every few years, not only to a different job, many times a different company. And when you move from company to company, that tends to come with a nice increase in pay. You have a nice bump in pay. You get a higher bump when you move to a different company generally than staying with the company that you're with and simply moving up through the ranks. And for me, in my career, I was very, as we say, coin operated. I was chasing the number. I was chasing the salary. Which has its advantages and disadvantages, to be fair. But that's what drove me. I was the person. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to be more familiar with the technology so that I could then ask for more from a potential employer. And in my case, it worked out pretty well. And I think if I'm able to do it, anybody should be able to do this. Trust me. I've worked with incredibly smart people in this industry, people that are much smarter than I am doing these things. So if I can do it, you can absolutely do it too, which is really how all of this craziness here sort of came about. We would not have been able to create this entire thing without your help and understanding what we were trying to do, and without really knowing and working with the people that I worked with in my industry. So I always recommend focusing on those considerations when you're looking to figure out, what do I do next? What certification do I go to? What do I pick? CCNA? Do I pick Security Plus? I don't know. You're going to have to answer it, but hopefully I've given you a framework that you can use to help work yourself towards ultimately what that might be. Let's do another question. I've got more in here. Let's talk about this, sort of a term that comes up a bit with the CompTIA stuff, and we'll sort of talk about that and where this comes from. This is from Dennis, who asks, is Linux considered vendor-neutral software? Well, that's a fine question, I think. You've probably heard this term in the world of CompTIA. CompTIA often touts this themselves and says the CompTIA certifications are vendor-neutral. They are vendor-neutral. And I think it's important to understand what CompTIA means when they say vendor-neutral, which may not necessarily be what other people think it means. So let's talk about what vendor-neutral means in the world of CompTIA. From CompTIA's perspective, vendor-neutral means that not one single vendor is exclusive to the knowledge that you will learn in a particular certification. For example, for A+, it's not just Microsoft. It's not just Linux. It's not just Mac OS. It's a combination of all these things together. Therefore, it's vendor neutral. See, that's their definition of vendor neutral. It's a fine definition. That works just fine, by the way. So what they're saying is that you're not taking a Microsoft certification. You're not taking a Linux-only certification, or at least not a single Linux type. You're not just looking at Mac OS. For A+, it's vendor neutral. You can get questions about any of these. And in fact, you probably will on your exam is a number one of those. So looking at Linux specifically, you've got questions here. Is Linux vendor neutral? Well, I guess it can be if you're talking about different flavors of Linux, different builds and different types of Linux. For example, you might be looking at Red Hat Linux, but you might also be looking at other Linux types, because there's many different types of Linux that are made in different ways for different purposes. So you might want to look at what the different types are that are out there and what you can choose from. And in some ways, you could even look and even combine other operating systems. For example, you could look at Mac OS and put it into the same mix. Mac OS, of course, is not based on Linux. It's based on Unix, but it's very similar in its style and in its feel. Certainly a lot of the functionality and commands you would use in Mac OS are identical to those you would use in Linux. There are obviously differences, some significant differences between them, but there's quite a bit of overlap between all of those. So if you wanted to learn more about Linux, you almost always have to learn Linux from a different perspective. Usually it's a sort of a Debian versus Red Hat, or it's a this versus this versus this. It's three different popular flavors of Linux, different builds of Linux. There is a fantastic chart on this on Wikipedia. If you ever wanted to map where did Linux start from and how did all of these different Linux distributions ever show up? Where did these come from? You can really focus on that. Let's see if I can find that. Wikipedia, Linux distributions. Let's see if we can figure out a list of Linux distributions. That would be the second one in my list. And in fact, on the Wikipedia website, you can barely see it. Off to the side here is a map of the different distributions of Linux. And they try to even document this a little bit. Let's look at the image, shall we? So here is the distribution. So it starts down here with the different distributions, and you can see how the distributions fork off of those and how they show up. We start with Slackware. We've got Debian. We've got, let's keep scroll down here. We're going to hit somewhere with there are a bunch of others. Some of them most of these you probably never heard of, and really breaking them out from that perspective. But there's where these started from and where they ended up. Let's see if I can move to the right here. Here we go. So we can see where they're going and how far we can see them working through here. Some of these names you might even recognize. There's Arch, Chromium's in here. What other? Oracle Enterprise, Oracle Linux. You can kind of track it back. Where did Oracle come from? Well, it came from Red Hat, and there's the Red Hat, which started. See, you can track all of these back using some of these charts that are here. So in many ways, Linux, boy, you want neutrality? There's a flavor of Linux and where they're based off, you can get them for anything. There's just tons of different options out there. So I would say yes. I would say that from a perspective of someone who has dealt with many different operating systems and working through them, yeah, I'd probably consider Linux to be vendor neutral, but it doesn't have to be. For example, if you were only a Red Hat system administrator, you were a Linux admin and you only dealt with Red Hat, well, that's not very neutral, is it? You're really focused on a single vendor. But I think most of us that work with Linux will probably have one Linux distribution that we commonly use, and that would kind of be our primary, but there's others that we might use too. So it doesn't always match up to a single vendor. I'd say certainly more than Windows and certainly more than Mac OS. Linux is probably the most diverse operating system that you will use. But of course, when you start combining these together, if you know Linux and you know Windows and you know Mac OS, well, now you've got some valuable skills and you can really apply those in many different places. So I'd say, yeah, Linux, I'd say vendor neutral. I'd say it fits that category, don't you? That's a good place for it to go. let's do some more of these questions. I'm going to move these off to the archive, and let's review some others that you have put into the mix. And let's see what these are here. So let's see what we might have and break these down in a different way. The idea and what we would focus on with these, let's talk about this one. We were talking about performance-based questions earlier, so I think this would be a good one to go through. This is from Andy, who asks, hey, can the performance-based questions come up first on the test second time around? Come up first on the test second time. Not sure exactly what you may be asking, Andy, but it could be one of two things. So first, performance-based questions on the exam are always the first handful of questions you get. So when you start your exam, in fact, this kind of throws people sometimes, the performance-based questions, they're the first thing you get. So when you start the exam, the most complex of questions that you will get compared to multiple choice, certainly you could put, I would say, performance-based questions. We can consider those relatively more complex than a multiple choice, but that's what comes up first. And if you're not expecting it, it can really throw you. A lot of people have come to me after the exam and said, I got these crazy questions at the beginning. I got 4 or 5 of them. I thought it was going to be the whole exam was these involved matching, fill in the blank, drag and drop questions. Like, oh yeah, those are performance-based. Like, what are you talking about? Like, those are the performance-based questions. Has no one talked to you about these? You should come to a study group. But they didn't know. They had no idea. And they thought maybe the entire exam was going to be these. They were very relieved after the third one that they went off into multiple choice questions. And so it's important to know that that's what's going to happen. And if you take the exam again, the first set of questions on the exam are going to be performance-based questions. Now, the other way I could interpret this from Andy is, could these be the same questions on the second time around? Let's say you take the exam and you don't do well. Let's say you failed the exam. So no problem. You go back, you study some more, you get those exam objectives, you use it as a checklist, you go back in to take the exam, and you see questions on the beginning that look very similar. These are the same questions from the first exam, or at least one, maybe 2 of them might be the same. So sure, you could get similar questions the second time through, but it may not be exactly the same. It's not going to be exactly the same. Every exam is a random set of questions, but they only have so many in the pool. So if you randomly select from the pool of performance-based questions, you might get one that's duplicated between the 2 exams. So that could happen. And it's not unusual. It's just something you have to keep in mind, that if you take it the first time, in fact, I really recommend that you do this. You'd say you take the exam the first time, you do as well as you can, but you don't do good enough. You fail that first exam try. When you go back to outside the exam center, you go to your car, you go to however you got there, you should already have with you a notebook that you could write in. I mean something you can easily, or maybe you can use your voice recorder on your phone. You should talk immediately about what you saw, what was on the exam, everything you can remember. And this is to be used for your own personal purposes. You can't give this information to someone else, or you would be violating the non-disclosure that you signed at the beginning of the exam, but you can use it for yourself. And you should, as long as you can remember this, the best times when you step out that door. The moment you step out the door, you start forgetting. So don't wait until you get home. Don't wait until you get on the train. Don't wait until you walk down the street. Right then, pop open your notebook, pop open your voice recorder, and start talking. There's a question, it talked about this, it wanted to know these things, so that you can go study those things afterwards. So I think that's a very useful way to give yourself information and intel that you can use and plan for your next exam sitting. But do it immediately, because you'll start forgetting right away as you go through those. So hopefully that answers some of the questions Andy had about performance-based questions. And if not, you can always ask again on the Vevox app. Other questions. Let's talk about more of these. So a lot of you have been asking about the voltages, the 120 volt and 240 volt. one or the other is going to be used somewhere in the world. So absolutely, that's what you're probably going to use either in the US, in Europe, and other places around the world. So hopefully that will give you some perspective as to what's there. And different countries have different power standards. When I globally say Europe, there could be differences depending on where in Europe you happen to be. So power is very specific to the country. Whatever that is in your country, the voltages and the hertz that are being used, that's what you use in your country. It may vary widely depending on where you happen to be. It's just one of those, power is a weird thing. Every country has decided to do things a little bit differently. The standards are very different depending on where you are in the world. So certainly there will be differences depending on where you go. Other questions. Let's keep going through this list. This is a pretty good one because it's sort of a strategy question. Let's go through these. Put this in published. This is from Charles, who asks, if a person's been out of the market for a couple of years and gained knowledge on the job and self-study, would it be necessary to take the A+ exam, or should you just go to Network Plus at that point, assuming that that's your next step, I guess, in the world of certifications? This is a really telling question because it deals with where you want to be versus where employers would like you to be. And so this is one of the things that is both the strength and in some ways the disadvantage of certifications is that people tend to use it as a checkbox. Oh, you have your A+? Good. We were looking for somebody with A+. Check. Now let's talk about the other things that you happen to know. So it can be a bit of a gatekeeping tool by employers. The problem, though, is someone like Charles, maybe you've been working in the industry for a number of years. Maybe you've worked on a help desk before. Maybe you've built your own computers. Maybe you've done desktop administration. Maybe you have extensive knowledge of troubleshooting, but you never got an A+ certification. Now you're getting back into the workforce, and after being away for a couple of years, and now you notice employers are asking for an A+. And then notice sometimes they will ask for A+ or comparable, A+ or similar experience. But most of the time they just ask for an A+. In those cases, that might be a checkbox that you have to check that box to be able to move forward with the employment process for that company. And in that case, you might want to go get an A+ certification. Maybe it will be relatively easy for you because of the knowledge you have. Maybe you'll feel like it's a waste of time because you already know this information. You've already done this in the industry. But if employers want that, it's not really a waste of time, is it? You're really able to check that box, and you can now talk about your experiences with that company because you've now passed through that particular level or requirement that they have set. So I would absolutely tell you to go get your A+ in that scenario. Now, if you start looking at the job postings in your area, nobody's asking for an A+. Everybody's simply asking for comparable experience or has a background in. They're not really focusing on the cert. Maybe you don't need to get an A+. Maybe you don't need the A+ cert to be able to continue through with the process of interviewing with that company. And in that scenario, you can get away with not having one. So that's really up to you. Now, whether you go to Network Plus next or whatever you go to next on your list, again, that depends on what you want to do in your career, and it depends on what employers are looking for. So you have to make the decision on what you do next. You may find that, I need to go back and get A+ because everybody in my area is asking for A+. Or you may find maybe you live in the DC area and you realize nobody cares about A+, nobody cares about Network Plus. Everybody seems to be asking me about Security Plus. Let me go get my Security Plus certification. So this sometimes isn't about what you know or what you think you should do next. It's really about someone else telling you what they would like you to have, and that will give you the advantage when you walk into the room on an interview scenario. So it's a bit of a loaded question, but it's one where you'll have to do a little more work to determine if it really is necessary to take the A+ and what your next steps should be with certifications. And I say next steps because throughout your career in IT, you will be working on certifications of some kind. It may be A plus Network plus Security plus. It might be Amazon Web Services or Azure or some other cloud-based service. It might be you're working on a certification that is specific to a manufacturer. Maybe you're getting a Palo Alto Network certification. Maybe you're getting a Splunk certification. Those are from those manufacturers. And throughout your career, you will find yourself doing this. It may not be every time you turn around, you're working on a cert, but maybe every year there's at least one that you're working on and trying to get through the ranks. There may be times when you're not working on a cert, but I think you'll find from a career perspective and from a planning for the future perspective, it's always a good idea if you keep working on those certs. It's always a good idea if you keep putting that certification in your pocket. It will help you in the future. And whether it helps you directly because somebody asked you for it, that's useful. One of the things that I think we don't talk enough about is when you earn a certification, you've learned something. Ideally, you spent the time to understand these topics. You worked at the command line. You worked on understanding what people want you to be able to do. You've spent time really understanding what's on the exam objectives. And now you're familiar with Mac OS. Now you've done some Linux work. Now you've gotten your CCNA and you've worked with switches and routers. At the end of it, even if an employer doesn't ask you for that as part of your job, you now know this. You're now more familiar with this technology, and you can use that in your day-to-day, whatever you happen to be doing. You're now smarter in the way that networks operate. You now know more about the packets going over the network. You now know more about the way that Mac OS should react when you perform different functions. You know more about Linux. These are things you didn't know about prior to getting the cert. So there is a personal knowledge that you're building on. You're building that foundation when you get these certifications, even if you're not using the cert directly to get a job or get a better job. So there is value there. And I think often in the industry, for whatever reason, this is more of a human nature thing, people tend to put down the process of bettering yourself. I don't know why they do. I do know why they do this, but I don't understand why they continue to do this. Is that people will speak negatively of things that you are doing positively in your life. And what I always tell people when they're in that situation is just ignore the people that are negative. They will continue to be negative the rest of their life. They will continue to be in that job that they are in the rest of their life. They will continue to flounder around, not understanding that if you continue to better yourself with knowledge and you continue to meet people and you continue to understand these technologies, you will be able to level up in your career and have more options available for your career, have more options available in your salary and other things that you can do throughout your career. And I think that is one of the most frustrating things to hear online, not because it affects the way I think about certifications, but I worry that it affects the way that other people think about certifications. And as someone who has been in the industry my entire career, working with technology, working through certifications, I think we counted it up on a recent study group, and I had about 15 or 20 different certs that I sort of accumulated through the years. That was a lot of hard work over a very long period of time. And every single one of those certifications gave me a little more foundation. I learned more about Ethernet, about cabling, about Windows, about Windows Server, about Linux, and you just keep adding to it. And then into security. When I was with McAfee, I think I got maybe 6 or 8 different McAfee certs. So all of those were on PGP and firewalls and intrusion prevention and antivirus. And there's the bulk of security that people have in many of their organizations. And just having that knowledge positioned me very well for continuing in my career to work with next generation firewalls before next generation firewalls even existed. So that's the value, is you're preparing yourself for whatever's coming next. And in my case, had I not spent all of that time on understanding operating systems and understanding networks and troubleshooting and planning and designing and looking at things at a packet level, I would have not been prepared when Palo Alto Networks showed up and said, we've got a new type of firewall and we'd like you to help us with that. I thought, well, I've never heard of this. I don't know what you're talking about. This doesn't look like something that's real, but I'm in. Let's go do this. And that was a fantastic thing to be a part of that I would have never been prepared for had I not gone through all of those different certifications in that path. So, of course, it's more than certs. It's about your experiences. It's about what you do day to day. It's about the jobs you work on. It's about the people that you meet. Certainly, it's a combination of all these things together. But you have to prepare now because you never know what's coming next. And that's, to me, one of the fantastic advantages of IT is that there's always something new. There's always something to learn. There's always something to learn that people haven't learned yet. You can be the new expert in what that new thing happens to be just because of where you happen to fit into the world of IT at that particular time. So I think if you're someone who is trying to figure out what to do next, it's a combination of different things. Think about what you want to do next in your career. What interests you? Do you like networks? Do you like data centers? Do you like databases? Do you like the cloud? Figure out what excites you and certainly follow that particular path to a degree. But also look at what employers would like you to do. Combine those two things together, and now you've got a nice mesh. Now you're building that foundation and you're preparing yourself for whatever comes. And that thing that's coming may be in 10 years. It may be in 15 years. It may be 20 years from now, but you need to be ready. The only way you're going to be ready if you keep along that path. The folks that are yelling at you that your certifications are a waste of time, nobody cares about that. All they care about is experience. Well, you can start to see where the short-sightedness is right there. So don't worry about them. Concentrate on your goals, make your own strategy of where you want to be, figure out what your path is going to be, and simply follow that path and you're going to be fine. That's what I say is your best way to go. Whether that's CompTIA, Microsoft, Cisco, AWS and Amazon, whatever it is, figure out the path and just go for it. There's plenty of room in IT for everybody. There's technologies upon technologies that you will never know in your career because there's too much to know. Find what you want to focus in, fill that niche, become the expert in it, and you've now got a career and financial stability for the rest of your life. It's really that simple. And it's one of the reasons we do what we do here, because we think getting this knowledge and getting a job and getting a better job is what we should be working on in the world of IT. And it's right there. All you have to do is go out there and grab it. Well, that has really brought us to the top of the hour. I think that's a great place to stop too. It is another great study group. By the way, we do another study group for A+ 2 days from now. So today is, as we sit here and record live, we're on a Tuesday. On Thursday, we do exactly the same study group with new questions. It's Core 2 on Thursday. This was the Core 1 study group. We'll do the Core 2 on Thursday. As always, when I stop this stream, it'll process in a couple of minutes and the replay will be immediately available on YouTube. Lori will have those timestamps for you probably by tomorrow, and you'll be able to point and find exactly what you're looking for. Great way to help sort of go over what we went through in this first hour and learn more about the technologies you need to know for later. We'd love for you to come back on Thursday for our Core 2 study group. And of course, next week, we have our Network Plus study group and our Security Plus study group. I haven't actually written those questions yet. So there's something more for me to do too. We want to thank you for being here. We do so much enjoy these live streams and we couldn't do it without you. Thanks for being here. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. Come on back Thursday for the Core 2. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on the A+ study group. Thanks, everybody.